Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, International Opportunities in India's Consumer Business. We are going to go ahead and get started this morning. Welcome to all of you. My name is Supriya Pandey, and I'm a Senior Global Consultant at Amritt. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to go over a few logistical details. If you're logged in, you should see before you the first slide of the presentation. Please maximize the browser window so that it covers your entire screen. You will also see a webinar applet, which allows you to send us questions throughout the session. The speaker, Gunjan Bagla, will answer the questions either through the course of the session or at the very end. In case you run into any technical issues, please call 1-805-617-7001. You might be asked for a meeting ID, which you can retrieve from the confirmation email we sent you, and it is also available at the bottom of the webinar applet. During the course of the webinar, if we have time, Gunjan will be running some interactive polls, and we would really appreciate your participation. In case there are any questions after the webinar, please feel free to email us at usa@amritt.com, and again, that's usa@amritt.com. I would now like to go ahead and introduce to you our featured speaker, Gunjan Bagla. Gunjan is the Managing Director of Amritt Incorporated, a California-based consulting firm focused on helping American companies succeed in India. His clients include companies like Reckitt Benckiser, Clorox, Kraft, Grace Foods, Nordic Naturals, Burt's Bees, Paramount Farms, Johnson & Johnson, Gojo, Hewlett-Packard, Lifetime Products, and many more. Gunjan's work on India's consumer market has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, and he has also written for the Happy magazine, HAPPI magazine, about India's personal care market. For his India expertise, Gunjan has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, on Bloomberg TV, BBC TV, and on Fox Business News. He writes about India for the Huffington Post and has been quoted twice in the Forbes magazine just this week. Gunjan has an MBA from Southern Illinois University and a mechanical engineering degree from the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur, India. He was also the president of the Alumni Association of the IITs. And now, here's Gunjan.
Thank you, Supriya, and welcome to all of you who have joined in from both the United States and India today. I looked at the registrant list, and we have people in the food business, we have people in the supplement business, we have people making consumer durables, personal care, automotive care. It's really a full range of professionals from sales and marketing as well as engineering and sourcing across the consumer spectrum. And we have a lot of material to cover, so I'll go as fast as you will let me. And I would really encourage you to send me as many questions as you can, because I will make sure that we take time for the questions. And if we run over, I will stay on for additional questions. A few years ago, we worked with a company called Paramount Farms. They're the world's largest grower of pistachios, and we took them to India. Today, the Paramount brand is visible across India. The product is sold at over 12,000 locations. They have a roasting and packaging plant in the western state of Gujarat. The picture at the bottom right is their old roasting plant. In fact, they've moved there since then. But the net effect is that for this company, India has become a viable new market, and they have expanded the top end of the nut and pistachio market. I remember the first time when I took this company to India, we were concerned whether the Indian consumer would pay the premium prices for premium quality, because Paramount has very high internal standards about what they deliver. And we found that there's been a vibrant market for this product. And the expansion has taken place by partly displacing the legacy product that had come from Iran for a century, also partly by bringing in new consumers who had never really been into pistachios, but had perhaps been eating almonds or other nuts, and they have taken a taste for the high quality and healthy, heart-healthy kind of nut that pistachios are. So this has worked out very well over the years, And I just wanted to start with this story because I think it makes a compelling case study. Just last weekend, I was talking to Mark Maston, the head of global sales and marketing, and the experience with India, because the Indian ambassador was here in town in Los Angeles, and we were talking about getting together with him. So let me move on. Why should you on the phone be thinking about India? Let me give you some high-level perspectives here. Bilateral trade between India and the U.S. used to be some $20–30 billion just a few years ago. It crossed $100 billion last year. And when Vice President Biden was in India last year, they talked about an ambitious $500 billion bilateral trade target, which would make India among the top 6 or 7 trading partners to the U.S. And it's a two-way trade. American companies selling to India as well as American companies buying from India. And we'll talk a little bit about that through the prism of the most vibrant part of India's market, which is the consumer market. Many of my examples will be focused on consumer packaged goods, but the insights and learnings apply to consumer durables as well. And for those of you who are on the durables business on this phone call, I encourage you to ask me specific questions about durables. As you mentioned, as you saw in the introduction, we've worked with Hewlett-Packard, we've worked with Lifetime Products, we work with people who do make consumer durables. The projection by McKinsey and others is that India will be among the top 5 consumer markets by 2025. It's not there yet, but the good news that just appeared a few weeks ago was that India is now the world's 3rd largest economy in purchasing power parity terms. So the US is still the largest, China is the 2nd largest, and now India crossed Japan. So there's progress, there's forward movement, and the consumer market is moving faster than the overall Indian economy. Personal care within consumer products is probably moving even faster. We think that both small and large companies still have a lot of ground that they can cover in India. And we are finding that our client executives who work for these companies, when they focus on India, generally speaking, find a career boost over time. Here's a little bit about us. I'm not going to dwell on this slide because this is really focused on your needs and your questions about India's consumer market, but this slide gives you a perspective of where we are coming from. Whatever we are telling you is things that we have learned in the process of helping our clients go to India and expand there. Some of our examples that follow later will not be from Amritt clients, and that's primarily because many of our clients are quite concerned about being known for their work in India. They like to keep a low profile, and so we take some examples from public data as well. So I will talk about the 4 P's of marketing as applied to India. I'll talk a little bit about R&D collaboration, and I'll touch upon sourcing from India, because you really need to look upon India as a 360-degree opportunity. It's not just about selling there. It's also about sourcing from there and using engineers and scientists from India. A few overview points first. So here is a perspective that often gets missed. And this is, the point I'm making here is that when you look at countries outside the United States, we have a spectrum where some of our so-called closest allies don't necessarily have a very highly positive view of the United States. This bar graph was prepared by Ipsos a few years ago, and you will see that people from India rank the US more favorably than almost any other country besides the US itself. And you'll see among the BRIC countries, Brazil is down at 36% over here, 20+16. China is down at 34%. Russia, and this is a few years ago, is down at 23. Today, if you polled Russia, it'd probably be even lower. Some of our NATO allies and our neighbors, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, Japan, you see them, they don't necessarily have a very positive view of the United States. And these numbers have edged forward a little bit in recent years, because this is old data, but not a whole lot. The Pew Center conducts these studies, and they still find that only about 10% of Indians have a negative view of the United States. This is visible across the streets of India, and I want to point out this picture here, which I took in Chennai in South India. This is an ad for a cell phone company, but the important point is that inside that snow globe, they show images of the Statue of Liberty and the Golden Gate Bridge and then clearly American school bus. And they do this promoting phone call service between the US and India. But the idea is that the images of the Hollywood sign and the Golden Gate Bridge resonate very readily to a non-English speaking population in India. They recognize these right away as American images. And that's a very powerful point. The wind is in your back when you go to India. It's just, you just have to figure out how to take advantage of it and convert it into revenue for yourself, for your company. The demographics for India are quite compelling today. It is a country of over 1.2 billion people. But you would probably, if you are new to India, be focused on the urban population, which is about 300 million. And the key is that most of these are very young people. India is one of the youngest large countries in the world. And many of these young people don't have their brand preferences solid just yet. So you can enter India and create a degree of brand loyalty for yourself in a manner that would be very hard for you to do in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Latin America, or other places. India is a very diverse country, 200 dialects and 23 languages. But the good thing is that business is run in English. So when you travel to India with me, or you go and visit our India team, you will find that the distributors and the business people you deal with have a good understanding of conversational English at the very least. I've got some other data about the top cities. I won't dwell on that right now because we do have a lot of material to cover. Let me give you a sense of some of the largest companies in India in the consumer business. So the gorilla in the room in India is definitely the Indian subsidiary of Levers, and their sales currently are over $4 billion. But Nestle is not that far behind. The Swiss company Nestle has been in India for a long time, and so has ITC, which is the Indian affiliate of British American Tobacco, but they also have a strong consumer business, which you will see later on. So these European-based companies have really turned native in a sense in India. They've been there long enough. Virtually their entire management is Indian. Their style of operating the company is Indian. Their brands are very specific to India. They design products for the Indian market and so on. Next on the list are the companies that have risen very rapidly in recent years that are of Indian origin. Britannia, which is whose primary product is cookies. Dabur, which was a traditional Ayurvedic natural products company. Morocco, which started out making coconut oil, but now they are into many other businesses. Coconut oil being used as a hair treatment in India, particularly in South India. But now at over $500 million, they are doing many other things. Nirma here is a company that we could spend an hour talking about. They rose very rapidly some time ago to upset Unilever's surf business. And now there's a vigorous competition between Unilever, Nirma, and Procter & Gamble that we can dwell into later if you want. Some of you might have heard of Tata Global Beverages. They actually own 8 O'Clock Coffee out of New Jersey. They bought a tea company in the UK. So they're really a mini multinational, if you will. And Godrej is an Indian company based in Mumbai that actually has subsidiaries in Latin America, and they're growing very rapidly in a number of Latin American companies, particularly in hair care. Why is India interesting? It's not just the size of the market today, it's what you're going to see happening in the future and in the near future. And there's really 4 main drivers of it. The per capita income in India has been rising very rapidly since 1991, and the number of people in abject poverty has dropped by over 100 million. The number of people who are billionaires have risen by 200 or 300% in the last 10 years. And the number of millionaires has also risen quite rapidly. So the ability for people to spend at any level has gone up. While this has been happening, people have been moving to the cities. 200 million people are going to move to the cities over a 5-year period, and this trend will continue over the next 15 or 20 years. And so this brings in people into the distribution system that most Western companies can access. I already talked about India being a young country, so I won't dwell on that further. The one other thing that I think you need to keep in mind about India, especially compared to China and other countries, is that media is ubiquitous in India. Media in terms of the entertainment industry, Bollywood as it is called, which produces far more movies than Hollywood does, and television media in India is widely accessible. It is also quite open to American themes. So MTV India is very popular, and the average Indian consumer knows Lady Gaga, and they know they read about music and Hollywood, and are aware of what's happening in Western media, and therefore many of them have Western aspirations. This is not to say that they have a Western way of thinking, but they certainly have aspirations to the Western lifestyle. Okay. All of these things are causing consumer spending in India to grow fairly rapidly. Here's a little example of a success of a company that has been in India for many years, but recently they noticed that there was a trend towards well-being. So Colgate decided that they wanted to launch a new toothpaste focused on people with sensitive teeth. And because of their strong presence in India, they rapidly became the market leader in the sensitive tooth business and built up a substantial market share when they introduced a new product. Now they could do this because they have a long legacy in India, and because they understand the nuances of working there. Let me stop at this point and see if I can take a poll of our audience and get a better idea of who is on the webinar today. So I am going to select my first poll, and you should see on your screen a question that says, how much time have you spent in India on business since 2009? There's a number of choices. Please pick one. It takes a second to answer the poll. Supriya, have any questions come in yet?
Not yet. So I would encourage everybody to please take a moment and send us any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay. I think most of the people who can vote have voted. Let me close the poll and share the results. It looks like 40% of you have spent no time in India, and another 40% have spent less than 10 days. So I'm going to give this webinar mostly to people who are new to India, and go accordingly. Let's start talking about the 4 P's applied to India, the 4 P's of marketing: place, price, product, promotion. Right? A few years ago, we were approached by this company that had been selling into India for a little while. They had, limited distribution, but they were happy with the level of distribution. However, the sales projection that they had made was far from being met. And the head of that product category called me and said, look, I'm in trouble because we had projected a certain number, and if that doesn't meet up, then we may have to take some drastic action here. And they hired us to diagnose that problem. We spent a few weeks looking at it, and it was clear very quickly that they were pricing the product at the right point. And because they had a limited distribution in India, they really didn't have a budget for print advertising or anything like that. And the promotion methods they were using largely at the point of sale and incentives to the channel were consistent with what we would have recommended had they hired us prior to entering India. The problem we felt might be with the product. And the way that we could diagnose this was really to run a small number of focus group studies in various parts of the country. I can't reveal to you what the product was, but suffice it to say that it might have had more appeal. This product category was far more developed in certain cities than others, given the geography of India. And this particular client felt that the key market for them were the cities where the category was not well developed. So we took some cities where this category was big and other cities where this category was small, and ran the focus group study in a very quick and nimble manner. And we found that geography really had nothing to do with it. They really had entered into a product category where Indian consumer had a preconceived notion of what this product should look like. They had an ingredient in their product that evoked some degree of distaste. It's quite popular in the West in that configuration. It was even quite popular in Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia in that configuration. However, the Indian consumer didn't like the way that the product tasted. So what we did was essentially recommend to them, almost, this was like 90% of the consumers had the same feeling, that they essentially remove one key ingredient from the product and keep everything else the same. The packaging didn't need to change because this ingredient wasn't featured prominently on the imagery. The price didn't need to change, and everything else could stay the same. So the net result was that the client could save a little bit of money because the product now actually cost less, while their sales and their repeat buys in particular went up significantly. It's a simple matter once you know where to look. And the message that I'm really giving you is your product has to be ready for India. Just because it sells in other emerging countries, or if it sells in Malaysia or Thailand or Dubai or Brazil, doesn't mean that the Indian consumer will appreciate it to the same degree. Here's another example from a very different business. Tupperware is quite successful in India, and they use a similar model for sales, but they introduced a couple of very specific products to India very early on. They created a spice box where Indian cooks in the kitchen could seal all of their favorite Indian spices in a plastic container that was airtight. And then they introduced a compartmentalized carrier. Many Indian employees take their lunch to work, and the traditional Western style lunch boxes don't really work well for that. So they created a plastic lunch carrier that was suitable. This was particularly targeted at northern and western India. And that really helped them get established as they were expanding their sales in India. So keep in mind that India is a very diverse country, as I mentioned earlier. So you may need to segment your product by quality, by price point, and we'll get into that in a little bit, by flavor. Frito-Lay, PepsiCo subsidiary Frito-Lay is very, very successful, and here's a picture of their brand. They do sell Frito chips and Lay chips and so on, but far more popular is their Kurkure brand, which they invented just for India. And this takes Indian spicy foods and converts them into packaged snacks that Indians absolutely love. And you will find Kurkure all across northern, western, and now even southern India when you travel to the country. Often you will need to modify your products to meet Indian preferences. At the bottom left, I have an example. When Dunkin' Donuts entered India, their franchisee in India felt very strongly that donuts alone just wouldn't cut it. So in India, the chain is called Dunkin' Donuts and More, and they offer sandwiches, they offer snacks of all kinds. Many Indians are vegetarian, certainly not all, certainly not most Indians, but they felt it important that they offer a veggie sandwich. And that's the picture I have at the bottom left. So let's talk a little bit about advertising. And here is an example of a product from the company I mentioned earlier, Dabur, which is the largest Indian-owned consumer product company. And you'll see in this print ad that they use, the ad is primarily in English, but they also throw in Hindi. It's a bilingual ad. The word Naya, written in yellow up here, means new. So it's a new and reformulated Vatika saffron glow soap. And then down here again, you'll see a mixture of English and Hindi in the same slogan. It says, Aisa glow, soch mein dal de jo. It essentially means your face will glow in a way that people will really think about it, or will create questions or intrigue in the minds of people who look at you. So this form of advertising is something you would not see in other countries, mixing Hindi and English. This woman is clearly this young woman in the picture is using lipstick and perhaps eyeliner, and so some Western products, some Indian products, and she's this typical mixture of East and West that is being typified in this ad. Now here's an example that might surprise you. Many people think of India as a very conservative country and one where you don't want to show a lot of skin, where you don't want to talk about things that might be taboo. I've lived in this country a while, and I remember when I first came here, the whole idea of condom advertising was considered very controversial. But here, this is a few years ago, I saw this print ad in a very much a family-oriented magazine, something like a Newsweek, Time, or People, and it talked about, it's about this product, Indian product called Kohinoor, and you can see that the image is not conservative by any means. I had a real chuckle when I was making a presentation at Raytheon, a local defense company, and I was talking about how India is different. Their corporate management had me censor this ad because they thought that their audience, their corporate employees, would be offended by this particular ad, and I had a real chuckle from that because this is something that doesn't even raise an eyebrow in India when it's embedded inside of a print magazine. So you have to be careful about how you interpret Indian mores and Indian social values. There are many conservative Indians, and there are many things that you wouldn't do, with your product or your brand in India. But the answers may be more textured and more complex than you might first imagine. India is home to a number of world-class ad agencies, and these agencies can advertise your product in all kinds of media. The great thing about Indian media today is that all forms are growing. Newspaper circulation is growing because literacy and wealth at the lower levels of the society are growing. Print magazines are growing by leaps and bounds. Radio, FM radio is relatively new in India, and there's plenty of advertising on it. Television is now pretty much ubiquitous. Online advertising is becoming a force not quite as significant as the US, but I think it will continue to grow. The standards of advertising in India, however, are different. You saw that one example in the previous slide. Here is another example of a company called Amul Butter. In the US, we say don't mix politics and religion with business. Those rules don't apply in India, and here is an ad from India's best-known dairy company, which also produces a product called Amul, and they're really, this is election week in India. The results are due tomorrow night, in fact, and here, Amul has had billboards talking about each of the major political parties in India. This one is talking about the party that is likely to create an upset victory tomorrow night, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and they're saying the BJP prefers Amul Butter. They have a similar ad for the opposing party, of course, but what I'm saying is it's not considered politically inappropriate to talk about such things in a brand ad of any kind. Previously, Amul Butter has, they run this billboard campaign where they replace the billboards every other week. And when James Gandolfini died from The Sopranos, they ran, a black and white ad across India mourning Gandolfini's death. So 2 points. Number one, death is not taboo in advertising for a brand, and number two, that The Sopranos is a big enough name in India that they could use it in national advertising. Here's a picture again from one of my favorite clients whom I mentioned early on. We are now talking about distribution. And most American companies, when they enter India, want to think about, how many Walmarts and how many, large grocery stores of the kind we have in the US can I get into? How many drugstores can I get into? And they're really thinking about this kind of, format. But often, 80 to 90% of your sales may occur in this kind of format, which is a much more traditional mom and pop store with a few hundred square feet, sometimes even less, and an owner-operated kind of environment. So don't ignore this market. In fact, for many of our clients, we recommend this as the primary entry point. It's a little more complicated, but it's well worth doing. Let me run my second poll here. Let's see how far along you folks are in doing business in selling into India.
Gunjan,
and I do encourage you to send some questions to me at this point.
Yes, and we actually have a question that I think is sort of a result of your previous few slides. Joanne is asking if they should launch in just one city.
That's a great question. So earlier I talked about how India is a vast country, 1.2 billion people, 300 million in the cities, and for some brands it makes sense to launch within a region, or it makes sense to launch within a particular retail chain. But we often look at a limited launch in, say, a couple of major cities. So that's not an unusual approach. There's no cut and dried answer. I don't think we should assume that there's only one right way, because it depends on the product, the brand, the unfilled needs in India, whether there's a regional variance for personal care, for food, for nutraceuticals. Often there is a regional variance in terms of preference, and so we have to take all of that into account. But very rare would be a recommendation to launch nationally at one go. Unless you're a Procter and Gamble, chances are that you want to do a phased launch in India. Now, whether it's phased by city or by region or by chain, those are things that we can look at to determine. So I hope that helps you, Joanne. Okay, let me close the poll. Okay, boy, we have an even tie here. I'd almost never see this. We are split just about evenly among people who are considering the idea and who have limited sales and who have, so we are quite well spread across all of the categories here. I don't think I've ever seen this before. Wow. Okay. Let me hide that and come back to our slides here. Let's talk a little bit further about distribution. So the physical distribution in India can be pretty diverse. Here you see somebody distributing eggs on a tricycle. This is not in a village in India. This picture was in India's 5th or 6th largest city, Chennai. And here's one of my favorite pictures from Delhi. You can order food from McDonald's, and if you order online or fax in or call in your order, they'll deliver. These are little scooters with the rear seat removed, and somebody shows up at your office or at your home, much like pizza delivery in the U.S. And let's look at the picture at the bottom. Now you're probably noticing the Pepsi truck, right, distributing Pepsi and related drinks. But my attention goes to this guy here. He's delivering, on a cycle rickshaw. This picture I think is from This is from New Delhi, okay, India's capital. And here's a guy delivering product on a manual powered tricycle rickshaw. So you'll see this kind of thing all over the place. And the important thing to keep in mind is that distribution is complex. It is multi-layer, and product may arrive in many different forms. So it's got to be packaged right. It's got to withstand heat and humidity and dust, and yet make it to the consumer in a form that the consumer will enjoy. I'll skip over this slide. And let me give you an example of a company that has been quite successful in India. Here's their ad. They started a promotion on American Independence Day, 4th of July. I'm still scratching my head why they chose American Independence Day to launch a product in India, or to launch a promotion. But certainly they have been terrifically successful, and you can't argue with success. They have over 140 products in India in many categories. They do have regional warehouses, and then they've got a number of warehouses in cities across India. They do showcase their product in some retail locations, which is where the consumer can come and pick it up. These are not your traditional stores, but places where the consumer can interact directly with the product. Their sales are close to $500 million, and they've announced that they want to be at as close to $1 billion soon as possible. They do a lot of their sourcing and manufacturing in India, but they've been tremendously successful at that. And I'm sitting here in Cerritos, California, just about 5 miles from where Nutrilite, one of the key components of the Amway business, is headquartered. Let's talk a little bit about pricing. And this is something that can be a scary thought for many clients. Example that I have is Procter and Gamble, and when their returning CEO took over last year, he confirmed that he would continue to expand the spend in India, although they did cut back in other countries. You will find products such as Tide and Cheer in India, but a lot of their sales for products are in single-serve packages. Procter and Gamble didn't invent this category. In fact, this category of sachets, as they are called in India, was invented by an Indian company whom we worked with closely in other areas with some of our clients. But for 3 or 6 cents, you can buy a sachet of shampoo or of soap and use it a single time. And for shampoos, this is more than half the sales in India. So it's not just an incremental kind of market. Last year, Procter & Gamble decided to introduce toothpaste into India, and they didn't go with their Crest brand. They already had a presence with Oral-B toothbrushes, and so they chose to launch the toothpaste under the Oral-B brand. And again, this is after considerable thought and research and understanding the specific nuances of where India stands. There's a pitched battle going on in India today between levers in the form of Hindustan Lever and Procter & Gamble and some of the Indian companies. So it's a vibrant market, but P&G certainly has its share of challenges in being able to expand its presence in India, and they're certainly using pricing as a weapon in India to be able to establish themselves against the multinationals such as Lever, but also against the Indian companies such as Nirma and others. Let me change gears to talk about engineering and sourcing briefly, but I think we have time to run our final poll real quick. I would appreciate if you could answer this one quickly so that we can move on to the rest of our material. So the question is, what is your biggest concern or worry when you think about India business? And because our previous poll showed that people were widely divided among their stage of doing business in India, I'm not sure what the summary of this result is going to show to us, but I think it'd be interesting to at least get a snapshot. Alrighty. I'm going to give one more second to see if anybody else is voting. And we have 50% worried about pricing and a quarter of you worried about distribution and about the difficulty of travel. Okay, it's an interesting mix, a little different from what we've seen before, but I think it's a fair assessment of some of the issues that come up. So let me close the poll. And let's talk briefly about using Indian talent. When you're going to go to India, it's not just about the market, it's about a couple of other factors. One is that India has a lot of engineering and science talent, and consumer product companies in particular can utilize it. I've made public presentations in the past about how we worked with Clorox in particular to be able to utilize the R&D talents of India. We can't tell you specifically what we've done with them, but it really falls into one of these categories. People can set up captive technical centers in India where it's their own employees working there. They can do a joint venture with an Indian company. They can find a third party that will do work for hire, or they can go through a collaboration or supplier contract, and we can figure out the right method for each company. The picture at the bottom, by the way, is the Jack Welch R&D Center run by GE in Bangalore. It has over 5,000 PhDs and a lot more people working there now, and they're working in many, many different businesses for GE. So when we look at global R&D, we will examine the various phases of the design cycle, if you will, all the way from investigation to concept, design, development, and test and verify. We look at your various initiatives and then we help you determine, which things can benefit from any collaboration in India or China. So that's kind of how we structure it. So Priya, is there a question from David?
Yes, I am just looking it up. You can just give me a second.
I'm sorry?
Do companies change the product quality level of Indian products to better meet the pricing?
That's a great question. So, if Indian consumers aren't willing to pay as much, if there's a market below the Western price, then when you introduce a product to address that market, you offer at a different or lower price and a different or lower quality. Well, most companies have a threshold of quality that they won't go below if they're going to put their own brand on it. Okay, and we certainly had this experience with our client Paramount Farms, who doesn't mind talking about this. They had their own standards. We're not talking EPA and FDA standard. They said, well, if we are going to do business, we are going to do it a certain way, and we will not go below these standards no matter what. Okay, and we respect that. We think that's what stands for a brand. So they won't add more salt than a certain amount. They won't let the product get more moisture than a certain amount, no matter what, if they're going to put their brand on it. And I think that kind of brand integrity is important to maintain. But that being said, if you look at your product and you can, there are many other things you can do with the packaging, with the marketing, with the with the effectiveness, and offer products at various points. If I can go back, let's address this question in a little more depth at the end, because I want to go back to the Procter & Gamble slide if I can, to illustrate this with the Tide and Ariel example. So let's carry on at this point in product development. We look at the various initiatives you may have and the opportunities to outsource or offshore some of the work. This is almost never, in our experience and our recommendation, done for labor layoffs or anything like that. It's really done to expand your engineering capacity to be able to enter new markets, in order to give you more nimbleness, many other things. And headcount reduction in the US is probably number 10 out of 10 different initiatives that we might undertake or we might recommend for you. Here's an example of a company where we enabled them to improve their profits by getting inspired relating to frugal innovation in India. Indian consumers use products and brands differently. So we took our Western client to India, and we showed them almost a dozen different ideas that we had pre-vetted that could be adapted from India to the company's Western market. They had no intent to enter India, in fact, in this particular case. And out of the 11 ideas, there were 2 that they felt were very worthwhile to implement within the Western market. They were approved by the R&D team and by the business, and then implemented. One in North America, one in North America, as well as other parts of the world where they were active. Third idea they felt was a little too radical for North America, and they handed it over for their emerging markets team, which is actually run outside of the North American geography. And then that team took it over to introduce in countries such as Indonesia and Africa. Again, this client had no intent of entering India. This was a while ago. They still haven't chosen to enter India, but they were inspired by both the engineering and the business models used in India to be able to develop this. There was another company that came to us really looking for intellectual property from India. They are the brand, they are the category leader in North America. And again, we can't say who they are. Their name wasn't mentioned in the introduction because they are quite secretive about what they do. And they noticed that there was a need to move towards natural or herbal solutions. And they came to us asking for guidance on finding the right types of products, IP, and so on. We looked at India. We also, in their case, looked at China, Sri Lanka, and a couple of other countries. And we tried to evaluate companies that sold the same kinds of products. We looked at the labs run by the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research in India. And we also found in that particular category that there were a number of individual inventors that were active. Finally, we recommended a small selection from the 24 odd Indian patents that we found, as well as some technologies that were really at the trade secret or unpatented level, and brought these to the client. They took over from that point to initiate discussions with about half a dozen companies. And this was about, I think, a year and a half ago that we completed this project. So some of those have since moved on to an IP licensing agreement. In one particular case, they found a little bit of an unexpected benefit. There was a company that they didn't really care for the technology, but they had a manufacturing facility, and they were able to offer a product at a very attractive price that the client could use almost right off the shelf with some very minor tweaks. So this became part of the inclusion into their supply chain. Not something they hired us to do, not something they expected us to find, but because we ran across it, we brought it to them, and serendipitously they also saved some money as a result of this. I won't dwell on this slide much, but there, we divide our various opportunities based on the amount of time and money that a client may want to invest and the degree of harnessing of local innovation. So at the upper right is the kind of captive R&D center run by GE with hundreds or thousands of people. Most American companies in the CPG business aren't ready to do that. So we find solutions that give you much of this value for a much lower investment through the the leverage boost you get is not as high, but the economics still make tremendous sense to be able to do this to expand your capacity and so on. Let me skip over this slide as well and just talk finally about thinking of India not only as a market, not only as a place where you find talent, but also as a source of innovation. The two areas where we've been active in finding innovative business models and innovative products for our clients is one, this whole business of frugality, where the Indian consumer, the Indian manufacturer, the Indian businesses are masters of making do with very little in terms of capital, in terms of real estate, in terms of packaging, and some of those inspire our Western clients to do things slightly differently, both in emerging markets as well as in their own home markets. The other area where we found a lot of success is companies that are going away from chemical or synthetic solutions and are being inspired by their customers to find natural or herbal products. Well, India has been producing natural and herbal products for 5,000 years, and there's a large body of knowledge and understanding. Some of it is not backed by science, some of it includes things that you wouldn't want to sell in the West, so we help people sort all that out and find those kinds of things that are scalable and usable back in the West or in new markets for them. Very briefly, I'll touch upon sourcing, since we did say that there are a couple of sourcing people in the audience. Most people today when they think about sourcing from Asia, they think about China. And true, there's a tremendous amount of sourcing that CPG companies are doing from China. But they do have some concerns about that. Part of it is around any intellectual property. Another concern is around the safety, particularly if it's products that are going to touch your body, either going to be ingested as food or nutraceuticals, or products that are going to be applied to your body. And so we found many clients who won't consider China for these kinds of reasons. Some of them have been worried about rising costs in China, although we don't think that that's we think that problem is actually solvable right in China. But there are people who are looking outside of that country for solutions, and all of these things typically drive people to look at solutions in India. We found numerous very successful solutions where people can provide ingredients, people can provide partial solutions to a product, where they can provide packaging, where they can provide design services. There's a whole range of things that are now applicable from India to Western markets. The best known example again that I can take from the public domain is Procter & Gamble with their Metamucil product. the main ingredient in Metamucil is psyllium, which is grown in the western state of Gujarat, and it has built a nice, vibrant business for them for the fiber product that Metamucil stands for. So we are at the end of the formal presentation. If you have questions after the webinar is over, you can email me at usa@amritt.com. We do offer on our website a report on the India's consumer market. It normally sells for almost $200, but if you have taken the time and trouble to attend this webinar and you drop an email at that address, we are happy to send you a copy of that within the next week at no charge. You can also ask for a copy of my Harvard Business Review article on overcoming consumer pitfalls in India that covers some of the points we discussed today in a little more depth. I co-wrote that with Dr. Vijay Govindarajan, who is a well-known professor at Dartmouth, and we're happy to send you a copy of that article as well. So let me stop there, Supriya, and see what our audience wants to know. I can come back to David's question. I'll roll back on the slides to do that.
Okay.
While you tell me of any other questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gunjan. And folks in the audience, please, this is sort of your last opportunity now to send me any questions you have so that Gunjan can answer them. So Gunjan, we have a question from Patricia who's asking, is it important to manufacture in India to avoid duties?
Yeah. Is it important to manufacture in India? So many of our clients have chosen to sell product into India that has been produced in the US or in other countries and then taken to India. I mentioned Lifetime Products as one of our clients in the consumer durable business. They produce plastic molded chairs and tables in Utah and in China, and it didn't make sense for them to establish another facility in India. Some of their product can come from one of those locations, and that works fine. There are other clients for whom this model has worked well. India has a series of cascading duties and taxes. Some of them apply to all companies, including Indian companies making in India, and some apply only at the point of import. So clearly, if you manufacture in India, you skip that import duty, which can be anywhere from 10 to 25%. So there is that advantage if you do manufacture in India. But I would, again, not suggest that people universally think that they have to go through the overhead of manufacturing anything in India. We really need to look at it on a case-by-case basis and determine where it makes sense. I'm in fact headed to India next week, along with one of our consumer clients for this very reason. They've been manufacturing in India for a while, and we are looking at additional sources for them. So certainly it is a possibility. The other thing I would say, which I probably didn't emphasize enough earlier, is that India can also be a base for manufacturing products for the region, for Asia, all the way from really Africa, all of Asia into Australia, and occasionally as far away as Japan. There are a few products that you can manufacture in India and bring back to the US more economically than making them here. Generally, CPG companies have not done that because packaging involves a lot of water, a lot of air, and you don't want to be shipping it on the open seas, but there are cases where it makes sense to do. But yeah, to answer your question, you don't have to manufacture in India, but it might be a good idea to do so. So to just flesh out David's question about changing the product. So I think, again, Procter & Gamble is not a client, but I do believe that they've reformulated Ariel Tide and other products because they dropped the price fairly significantly. The packaging certainly looks different. You don't find the liquid Tide and Cheer in those sturdy jugs in the same manner in India. And often the packaging is in a plastic bag, not even a carton. The ingredients, I think, may also be different. Now, part of that is to respond to Indian consumer needs because the way Indians wash their clothes is different. And historically, most Indians are fluent enough to own a washing machine, but also fluent enough to employ a servant. So it's not the housewife or homeowner who's washing the clothes. It's an employee, and so the dynamic works a little bit differently. I have other examples of, in my book I talk about how Whirlpool developed a washing machine to take, to address that need specifically. But to answer your question, David, yes, reformulation of products is not unusual. And, this business about Oral-B compared to Crest may also have been driven partly by not wanting to introduce a Crest that was, highly different from the Crest in other countries. I hope that answers David's question. Is there anything else, Supriya?
Yeah, Gunjan, we have one last question from Marjan, who's asking, do you help only with market entry, or do you also help companies with a presence already in India?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. So while much of my talk is focused on new entrants to India, you'll notice that on our client list we have people such as Hewlett-Packard and Reckitt Benckiser and others who have been in India for a long, long time. Reckitt Benckiser through their Dettol business for 100 years, and HP for more than 20-25. So yeah, we help people at all levels. And again, this webinar is not a sales pitch. So if you have specific interest, then the best way to deal with it would be to drop me an email, and we can respond at usa@amritt.com on how we can help you specifically. So I've really enjoyed this presentation and this conversation with the audience. Supriya, can you take it from here?
Yes, thank you very much, Gunjan, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. We hope it was informative. If you have any additional questions for Gunjan, please do email us at usa@amritt.com. Please make sure as you exit the webinar that you answer a brief survey that we present you. We would really appreciate your feedback. If you have any friends or colleagues who might benefit from a similar webinar, please do have them register on our website, www.amritt.com, and we will notify them of any upcoming webinars. Thank you very much for attending today, and have a nice day.